Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And Ben, on an interesting week, welcome back to you.
Yes, mate, a very interesting week indeed. I honestly think, Bryce, I didn't think it would get to this. I didn't think we'd go back down in Victoria here in Melbourne to stage 3 lockdowns, but here we are.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? That clearly we've got a country that's now got one particular segment that's in lockdown and the rest isn't. But it was interesting to see how that was going to flow out anyway, because you see that certain parts of Melbourne were being locked down and others weren't. So I did see some reports of some people around mental health and also feeling marginalised around that. So it was always going to be tricky just at that level. Let alone the level that we now find ourselves in at an economic level, disparate from the rest of the country.
Yeah, look, I think the difference this time around is we're probably a little annoyed, right? Because the reality is, in all honesty, this was avoidable. We're effectively, slowing our progress in the economy, and that's going to impact people's lives as well. All on the back of non-compliance. So, we've had obviously the fiasco in the hotel quarantine, which is the start of this mess, and also the Cedar Meets where they weren't practicing social distancing, and that got out of hand. And I think that's the message. And because the government couldn't do the tracing that they wanted to do because not enough people downloaded the app, here we are. And so that should be a message to everybody in terms of that's the consequences. So if anyone's whinging now about, being in lockdown and they didn't download the app, and a lot of people misread what the app does, right? Because when the people are doing the tracing to try and work out the connections to how you got it and who gave it to you, it's strangers on the street. It's, strangers in the shopping centre or the cafe or you don't know who these people are. They don't, and so we've got all of these unknown cases, and that was the trigger for the health people to basically say, the health experts to say, well, it's out of control now. We don't know where it is. Whereas if everyone had sort of complied and downloaded the app, we would be in a far better position, and we could have potentially continued with the ring fencing strategy. So that to me is the disappointing thing. And now, to be honest with you, it's up to all of us to do the right thing again. Otherwise, we'll continue to have challenges here in Melbourne.
Yeah, well, Ben, so I think annoyance is a good way to put it. I mean, but like you say, it's not as if we have to go through a mental adjustment, because people understand what it takes. I mean, our buyers team now is ready for private inspections, online auctions, nervous vendors, anxious agents, and buyers that are going to have question marks again around what does this mean for the bigger picture. But the reality is that for anyone who has those questions, all they need to do, Ben, is rewind about 6 or 7 episodes and go back to the original message around stay calm, and the fact that we are now approaching 300 episodes, Ben, and probably for a quarter of those episodes we have banged on in some form, either directly or indirectly, about the importance of asset selection. At the risk of sounding like a broken down record, asset selection was critical back then. It's still critical now that we're in second wave.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I just had a look over at the auction results from last weekend, and we saw, the good numbers here for Melbourne, clearance rate of 60.6. That's the final clearance rate. Sydney was 61.5. But you drill a little deeper into the actual numbers, Bryce, and it was only one area that really dragged it down quite a lot, and that was the West. They had a clearance rate of 39.1, whereas inner 67%, inner east 69%, inner south 63%, Northeast 69%. So it's just where the clusters were. That's where people weren't necessarily moving around. So I think we're going to see, we had planned a number of auctions at, sort of 448 for this weekend, which was higher. Like, it was only 348 this same time last year, right? But we're probably going to see about 50% of those at least withdrawn or pre-sold. And as you say, we've just, the fortunate thing about what we get to do is that we're full-time on it. But those people trying to buy a home, trying to work, trying to look after their kids and all that, that's going to be difficult for them. And it's going to, as you say, it's going to be difficult for the sellers.
Well,
so
the
that's
stock's
the
tight,
challenge.
Ben. Let's say after phase one, wave one, stock was very tight. And as I've said to my team on a number of occasions, I've been doing this professionally since 1998, Ben, and there has not been a year since 1998 when stock hasn't been tight. There's always been a stock issue in inverted commas, right? But this year, I will admit, it's more acute than I've ever seen.
Yeah,
but
definitely the good stock. That's really hard to find. Absolutely.
Because you'll have some people in distressed junk stock that there'll be plenty of that that you can buy if you game. But clearly, that's where we say avoid. It's dangerous. But look, we will. My message to folks right now is we will still be buying, Ben, as a buying group. We will still be buying the same sorts of properties we've always bought, and we will be dealing with agents who are postponing auctions, bringing it forward, dealing with nervous vendors who are, to be honest, I've listened to some media folks that in principle I respect a lot over the last 48 hours, Ben, and I've got to say, I think that some people just need to make sure that they are providing a leadership message rather than an anxiety and fear message, because people need some strong leadership during this time, because it is uncertain for everyone.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's no doubt if you do a sensitivity measure on the tone of the stories, they're still toning negative, Bryce, and they're still toning fear. And I mean, by way of example, the RBA's statement, right, that was released on monetary policy on Tuesday, everyone grabbed, this is going to go for a bit longer. We've got to have, sort of more resilience and so forth. But the worst of it was behind us. Do you reckon anyone reported the worst of it was behind us? No, everyone still said the governor had, these comments that it's uncertain, there's still challenges ahead. We've got to keep digging deep. But the worst of it was behind us. Did you? No. I didn't hear any media outlet talk about the worst of it was, and it is. I mean, if we can contain the virus only into Melbourne, and then get on top of it, and we'll know in the next couple of weeks, probably 2.5, 3 weeks, if our numbers start coming down, then we've executed successfully like we executed the first time. Then watch sentiment improve, watch positivity come back, and and people starting to get some normality back in their lives. And there is still some people around Melbourne who do know what they can do, and that is exercise and going to work. So I don't think we're going to see that same level, but I do also feel for the for those owners of businesses who have got to stretch that very limited cash flow that fraction further, and that could be too much for them, right? They won't be coming out of this, and that's really disappointing again, because in our mindset it was avoidable. So you got to think about those.
Absolutely, and a big shout out to those folks that will be dealt another round of pain. Someone who owns a restaurant, someone's in the arts, all those sorts of things. So who may have been looking at some cash flow upside, and now all of a sudden they're going back. So clearly there's people that are affected by this, Ben, a lot, right? So not disrespectful, but it was only this week that the ANZ CEO came out and said, look, because everyone talks about the September cliff, Ben. Well, the ANZ CEOs come out and said, look, and the banks are not stupid. They get no joy out of anyone defaulting, right? Particularly through an X Factor event like this out of their control. So he's come out and said we're up to another 4 months, and on a case by case basis,
all of them have done that. So basically, the whole banking, the big four.
So that should give people confidence that people aren't just going to say, well, stuff ya. All the best. Hope you for people who are in genuine hardship, they will not be looking to default on mortgages across the country. So the government will, they've got a response, their first economic update later on this month. They will know that property is too big to fail. They will know that they need to provide stimulus to get out of this. So,
correct.
But I reckon some companies who are being, they talk about companies that are a little bit ghost or zombie, Ben, where they are only still alive because of some of the stimulus packages. That will be interesting to see how that's responded. Maybe there might be some more targeted stimulus, but look.
And we've been consistent, Bryce, to say that there was going to be no cliff in September, and now there isn't. And we would encourage those people who were a little bit uncertain the first time, so they took advantage of the repayment holiday. Have a look at your numbers, guys. There is a lot of people that I spoke to had adequate buffers, like, $10,000, $20,000 buffers, but they still opted to do the repayment holiday. And now they feel a little bit better in terms of their situation. They really don't need to have an extension, those people. So again, I shout out to everyone. We've got a free platform called the My Wealth Portal that you can go onto and you can set up your numbers. And Bryce, we've just commissioned the start to build what we call Money Stretch, which is a modelling. We're going to build a modelling piece into the My Wealth Portal, which we hope will be ready by the middle of August, so plenty of time. In the next 4 weeks, we're working very hard to build this new application. Now, what it does, Bryce, is it allows you a sandpit to work out how much your money will last you from a time point of view if you have an impact to income. So, if we've got 6 weeks here in Melbourne to set up, to do the deep dive, to work out where all your money's going, and then we'll introduce that application, and then everyone can have a go at basically working out, putting their numbers into there, playing around in the sandpit, which don't affect your live numbers. You can transfer your numbers into this modelling software, and you can have a bit of a look around. So stand by for that, but it does give people an opportunity to do that. So we obviously, we care for our community around making sure that they understand that they don't have to do these repayment holidays, because all it just means is additional interest that you have to pay. So if you can still continue to keep meeting your commitments, this will show you how to do it. So stand by for that. But it's a good time to announce that.
3 ways, Ben. tpc.moneysmarts.com.au or go to the homepage of
MakeMoneySimpleAgain.com.au. That's the other way. Yep.
Yeah, well, that was stole my thunder there, Ben. The third way is to get the manual that comes with it. And if you go to our propertycash.com.au and you download the free book, we'll give you the manual, but we'll also give you easy access to the portal, which you just talked about, which is for free. So you're right, Ben. We do care about people managing their money. We care about people trapping their surplus, and we care about people getting through this. So they're very, very good resources in that money stretch. So, Ben, our message of calm through first wave is the same through second wave. People should just keep calm and carry on. But we've also got some more exciting news on the sports front, Ben.
Yeah, it is. What a quality young man. Not only an elite operator in his subject matter field, but also getting on with setting himself up for his future. So he's delayed gratification in all aspects. So no, I really enjoyed today's interview.
Well, I've done the old curiosity approach there, Ben. We haven't announced who it is, so I'll give the details shortly, but stick around for that. But a couple of things that are going to be helpful for today's podcast, Ben, is a reference to the fact that, the women are hosting the World Cup soccer, Ben, here in Australia.
Yes, what a wonderful
New Zealand.
Win. Congratulations. What a wonderful
Well,
it's amazing. It's great.
Oh, it's just so good. I just can't wait to have all that, the festivities and the atmosphere and the energy around all of that. So that'll be just exciting to have the world game attention down here. But Ben, I just dropped a little hint as to a little segue as to why that's relevant for today's, for two reasons. One, it's a significant thing. And two, there is a link to today's chat. And then I just wanted to also mention before we get into it, Ben, that last week's episode, 293, you and I riffed it on what properties to buy on Q&A day. So we've had Baljot. I hope I got that name right, Baljot. just sent a little note during the week to you and I, just saying, thanks guys, appreciate the tips. I listened to your episode 293 and I found it I find it really helpful.
Great. Oh, it's good to see we're helping one person. That's always helpful.
We'll take it one at a time, Ben. We'll just take
Absolutely.
it one at a time. But we appreciate when people write into us, and so I just wanted to nail that. So, before we get into the interview, Ben, I just want to go to my mindset minute theme. One of the friends of the couch here, Jane Slack-Smith, and I caught up for lunch a week and a half ago. And as she was strolling back from that lunch, Ben, we met in Carlton. She lives in Carlton, so she was walking home. Do you know how you walk past the coffee shops and they'll often have a saying or something on a chalkboard or up on the menu board or anything like that, Ben?
Yes.
She had one that she took a photo and sent to me, and it was this. And I just wanted to ponder and want it to land. But it's also, Ben, just give you a little heads up, it is also, I want it to percolate because I think it's relevant for today's guest as well. All right, see what I'm doing here? When you're playing along at home, I'm just sort of making it all part of today's episode. But I see now that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are, Ben. Mm-hmm. So you got to let that land, because some people might go, yeah, well, what if I've been born into a certain set of circumstances that's privileged or underprivileged? I get that. But you are not constrained by the circumstances of your birth into being either a good or a bad person. You get to make those decisions yourself. And the way in which you make those decisions says a lot about your character, Ben. It's the decisions you make that determine your character, not the circumstances of your birth. So I thought, first of all, shout out to Jane. Thanks for flicking that through to me, because she's a very deep thinker, Ben, very well read, very knowledgeable professional. So I appreciate that. But two, you can see where I was going for that in terms of the conversation we've had with our guest today, because there was some stuff where this particular person had to make some choices, and those choices determined the pathway that they ended up on. So, okay, I've built it up a bit now, Ben. I think we should get straight into it. What do you reckon?
Let's go. Let's go,
All right. So today's guest is Chris Ikonomidis. He is a professional soccer player. We had the privilege of chatting to him recently. So let's cut to the interview we had with Chris Ikonomidis. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today. We have Chris Ikonomidis, hope I got that right, who's an Australian professional footballer who plays as an attacking midfielder or as a winger for the Perth Glory and the Australian national team, Ben. He is notable in being capped by a senior national team despite not yet having played a single game at club level at the time. He is also the 2019 Harry Kuehl medalist. Welcome to the Property Couch, Chris Ikonomidis. How did I go with the name?
You went surprisingly well, mate. I get that wrong a lot with people. So, very happy with how you pronounce it. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I did cheat. I went to Wikipedia and I had a little pronunciation for me, so I did cheat. But mate, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. You and I were engaging recently on Instagram, and you happened to mention that you have been listening to Ben and I since you were 19, and you've got a real passion for property, and you've got a passion for setting yourself up for life after professional sport. So I thought there'd be a really good opportunity on a number of levels to get you on and share your story with our community. But for those people who are not familiar, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a Sydney boy who's now playing professional sport over in Perth, but how did you get there?
Yeah, the story how I got here is pretty strange. It takes all kind of little walks of life. I started as a little boy wanting to make it as a professional footballer as my only dream, and it eventually took me to make the decision to drop out of school and not finish my education and pursue a trial that I got in Europe in the form of Italy, where at 16 I went over and had a 3-week trial and did well, got signed. So made the commitment to go over there at 16 years of age and chase this wild dream of becoming a pro and turning it into a life. And my journey took me 5 years playing professional in Italy, a year in Denmark, and 2 years now in Perth. So it's been a really interesting journey. I've lived already in a few different countries, and it's really given me everything I think I have in life today.
How did you go at such a young age, sort of going over to Europe and being in big populations and big passionate sport lovers and trying to apply your craft whilst you're still trying to work a little bit about what life is at that age?
Do you know what? It was kind of it was scary and it was really hard. But I think the fear of failing or the fear of missing out on my opportunity to become a professional kind of formated me to overcome all that kind of initial fear and just get on with it and get through those tough times and forge some kind of career for myself. And I was lucky enough to have a family that's so supportive of my dreams and everything I want to achieve. So having them to kind of back up on and to cheer me up when I'm down was, I think, the deciding factor of my career.
What does that look like? Do you have family that was chaperoning you over at that time?
No. So both my parents work, and when I got the contract official offer at 16, and this isn't a dream story where I'm earning millions of dollars at 16. This is bare minimum to survive was what I was on when I first started. And I basically looked at mum and dad and said, guys, I'm in year 10 now. I'm leaving. See you later. Like, I'm flying to Italy and I'm not coming back. And they were for that. They knew how passionate I was about soccer. So they let me go and shoot my shot. And the first couple of years were really tough. My mum was upset in particular, losing her youngest child overseas and being so far away from him was hard on her. But things got easier, things got better. I started finding my feet in terms of lifestyle, language, and also on the pitch, doing much better and attracting interest from other clubs.
So I guess you went over to Europe. You backed yourself, and by the sounds of it, the stints that you had in those European clubs were successful. Did they form the platform for you to ultimately return to play for clubs? Because you did play for the Western Sydney Wanderers for a bit. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, going over at 16, I wasn't fully professional. I was kind of in that semi-professional stage where you can still miss out on the boat to have a career out of the sport. So I went up against all the higher competition levels in Europe and prevailed and got the contract that I needed to support myself, and the first team contract. Also got called into the Socceroos at international level, which again boosted my profile. And when I got the offer to come to Western Sydney, and then after that, the offer to come to Perth Glory was, I was more than happy to do it and excited about the new opportunity in Australia.
I want to just, obviously as a young, early 20s boy, and you get the call up to play for the nation. Tell me about that first cap that you got in terms of, the exposure and the opportunity to mix it with the best in the country.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that question, because not many interviews I've done with sports journalists have actually asked me that question, and that's something that I hold very close to my heart. When I was a young boy, I kind of promised my grandfather, who has passed away now, who was of Greek heritage, that one day I'd grow up and represent Australia for him, because he'd fallen in love with the country that had given him all this opportunity to have a better life. And at 19 years of age, I kind of pinched myself when I was walking on the pitch with all my heroes when I was a young kid, Tim Cahill, all these guys. It was surreal for me, and I'll always remember that game as probably the best sporting moment and best moment of my life.
Well, I did read that you had the opportunity to represent Australia, or you had the opportunity to represent Greece. And what I read is you were emphatic in your response that you wanted to represent Australia. And but I didn't know the grandfather backstory. So was that the reason why you were emphatic to represent Australia?
Yes, that, and also because I have a Greek background, but I'm definitely an Aussie. I've grown up on Cronulla Beach, and you can't get more Aussie than that. So the Aussiness is kind of in my blood. I've got the Greek heritage, and I'm proud of my heritage, but I definitely call myself an Aussie. So there was never really any question about my kind of allegiance there.
I take it was easier for your mum to stomach the fact that you left Sydney and to go over and play in my hometown in Perth. So I'm excited that an elite player like you is representing Perth, clearly. I'd only be slightly happier if you decided to change codes and play for Fremantle, Dockers, but a very soft spot for the Perth Glory. So I take it would have been easier for your mum at that stage to see you on the other side of the country rather than the other side of the world, which she did as a 16-year-old.
yeah, it was much easier for her. And as I said, things got easier as I got into my later years of teenager and my early 20s, but she still had that kind of void missing in her. So when I came back to Australia, she was so excited, and coming back here also opened new avenues for me. It got me more into my properties and stuff like that I've been so interested in and so emphatic about doing. So it's been a whirlwind career for me so far, and I'm still only 25, but I'm enjoying it very much, and I love taking my family along for the ride.
Chris, we've talked before on the podcast about the importance of traveling internationally and getting that level of maturity. You've been able to do that. It's obviously very clear in terms of, we haven't met you before, but your level of maturity and obviously that's been born through great upbringing and also putting yourself out there in the arena, as they say, around traveling as a 16-year-old and getting that maturity as a young person. And also now as a young person looking at your financial future potentially beyond football. What do you reckon that was that has driven you to sort of focus in on, basically setting yourself up for a financial freedom?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the sooner you get off that kind of life support of your mum and dad, and for me it was very, very early. It was premature. At 16, I was kind of self-sufficient. The sooner you start doing equations in your head, okay, I'm only making €1,500 a month here. Okay, I got to make that last for the rest of my life. Okay, I have to budget now. I have to manage my cash flow. I can't afford that. I have to start saving for an investment. And that kind of, it deemed a lot more responsibility on myself. And I kind of owned that and always wanted to create something for myself, knowing that football doesn't last forever. It's 15 years if you're lucky. So to be able to use that and harness that strong cash at the time that you're getting paid, that strong contract or whatever you've got, into creating a more substantial or more consistent wealth base has been my passion since I started football.
Is that Ben gave you a lead up then, but what has been, was the fact that you were isolated as a youngster the driving force, or was there conversations over the kitchen table that you had growing up with your family that sort of set the foundation? Where did the foundation come from? Being isolated or over the kitchen table?
I think it was a mixture of both. My family's made of smart people. My dad's a dentist, my mum's a teacher, but they're not kind of savvy investors. They're not property investors. They're not this kind of stuff. So to a degree, my dad always told me, property is a good thing to get into. And that was kind of the level of interest I got on that side. Also combined with the fact that I was by myself and kind of took on the responsibility that, all right, I need to start providing for myself fully now. I need to find more means to make money. If soccer's not enough, I need to find other property investing. I need to find different stuff. So a combination of that and a combination of a little story I'll tell you quickly was just driving around when I was, I think, 10 years old with my dad. And he had this money that he needed to invest. And he went to his accountant, and his accountant said, oh, you should get into property. So anyway, we go in to the nearest kind of massive development site. And this so-called spruiker comes and gives us his shiny brochure and sells off the plan. And he was so convincing to me and my dad that we took that brochure back to his accountant and he showed him, and the accountant kind of thankfully politely said, you know what, guys, this is okay, but why don't you try and invest in a bit of land or something else? So thankfully, my dad thought, oh, okay. So we went and bought a house down the road. And this is in 2004, right? And I'm talking about in Sydney. So in today, this is 16 years later, that apartment is the same value that we were quoted for. And the house has since tripled in value. And that kind of just started making me question why. Okay, why is that different to that? How can I replicate that? So that was also a big spur for me to get into the property kind of mindset and thinking and research.
Thank that accountant. The $1,000 a year that you might pay that accountant has been worth gold, and what a great story. I mean, the horror stories are normally the other way around, Chris. So I think that one's a That one's a beauty. And so, hey, keep sharing those stories, right? Don't say, oh, look, I've got a little side story. They are the stories that we want to hear about because they're really important for people to get a sense of that. And that's obviously been a great foundation for you now. That knowledge is never going to be lost in you. And that's our purpose of the podcast, is to make sure that knowledge is, passed on to as many people as we possibly can, because that's a real life example of what can happen.
So Chris, with that as a backdrop, so you've gone from that experience with the accountant. What happened next? Take us on the journey to your first investment property.
Yeah, so to be honest, I've always had the plan since I was 16, 17, starting to look at a career in football. And I'm thinking, okay, so I've got a 15-year span here. I need to do something in that 15 years with my money to make it last another 50 years. So uncommon to the standard football player or professional athlete will just be to spend 95% of what we make ourselves look luxurious or wealthy or what kind of other class they want to think. And for me, not to buy into that kind of crap and just to kind of just stay humble, stay on tack, stay on track with everything and come up with a plan that will actually work, to me makes a lot more sense. And I think that's due to my philosophies with money and my upbringing with my family and kind of my culture within my family as well. But that got me definitely thinking property. So to kind of create a property plan or a property portfolio that's best suited to myself and my earnings and my potential earnings, it takes a lot of planning on my part. I've done it by myself. I've done a lot of thinking, and you'd be surprised, but us professional athletes, we've actually got a lot of downtime to think. We train from 7:30 till 1 o'clock most days. So the rest of the days you're either sipping lattes on Cottesloe Beach or you're planning some stuff. So I've come up with a plan, and you boys can feel free to critique it, to tear it in half, or to tell me I'm absolutely stupid. But it's my plan so far. So.
Yeah, well, before we do go on that, I think that you glossed over something that's really important. I think that I've clearly never been a professional athlete. I've never been involved in professional football, soccer circles, but I'd imagine there is a bit of pressure because of the European leagues and the South American leagues, where there's people on ridiculous money contracts, and so they are very lavish and outwardly lavish on what they do. So to be able to resist that, you glossed over it, but you said 95% of the people that you're rubbing shoulders with feel the pressure to be showy and spend 95% of their money. So how hard is that to resist? I mean,
boys, you'd be so surprised about the level it actually is over there. So I was fortunate enough to play for a decent sized club in Europe, and in the form of Lazio, where I was coming up as a youngster. So as an 18-year-old Aussie kid from humble background, I've come into the kind of change room of things, and in the car park. So there's an underground car park, and I promise you, every car was either a Mercedes, a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or a Porsche, right? And I come in with my
push bike.
Yeah, pretty much like this rented old 1970s Fiat van or whatever I was driving because it was cheap at the time. And the players are just taking the mickey out of me, and they all have these Louis Vuitton wash bags that they carry interchanging with their diamond Rolexes, and I've got none of that stuff. I was wearing thongs and tracksuit pants to training most days. But I kind of enjoy playing that role, and that role of the guy that doesn't care about his label on his clothes or who gets called cheap or whatever. Like even recently in Perth Glory, last season I had the nickname as like the cheapo who never wants to spend money at lunch, always packs his lunch before training and stuff like that. But I kind of embrace that. I like that kind of underdog scenario where I'm building my wealth in the background and not showing anything on the surface.
Let's just see who has the last laugh, Chris. That's probably there's the delayed gratification. I mean, seriously, the level of maturity in not only attitude and belief and humility for your age, and also the financial smarts that you're also bringing to the table. This is turning into one of my favorite podcasts.
I know, because Chris, we've had Matt Strama on, who's from the NRL, and you and I chatted that you listened to that, and he was talking around one of his passions in his role in NRL is to is to try and overcome what you just described, where people are probably not the European leagues because they got, well, hopefully they can keep some of it, but the idea that you've got this limited life in professional sport, and at the end of it, you could, in some of the cases, and the off-air and on-air conversations I was having with him was, they could be digging a ditch, 2 years after their career because they spent it all, and then there's no currency left for them to earn any money afterwards. So, I mean, you say it tongue in cheek, but it's incredibly wise, and as Ben said, very, very mature approach that you're trying to create some longevity of your cash flow here, and at some point live longer than some of your contemporaries.
Yeah, 100%. And thanks for that compliment. It's definitely a big one coming from you guys. But yeah, like the thing is, it's not that I want to not work from 36 years of age onwards. I just want to kind of have that financial freedom to choose if I want to take a long holiday or to choose with more of a passion outlook what I want to do after football, whether it be coach youngsters, whether it be whatever, commentating, whether it be property. So yeah, that kind of desire for freedom of choice once I finish football, or whether it be an extra 10 years after that, is really the burning desire for me to do things the way I do.
So Chris, where did you start on the financial transformation journey for yourself? What you had this, you had this experience with your dad. You've gone to look at the property. You've been watching that. Was it books, magazines? Where did you start to get your education around money management, property, and investing?
It was a little bit of a mix of a combination of trying to talk to people, successful people like my dad's friends, my dad, and the likes of that, or buying the magazines, the books, the courses, and all of that stuff. But what I found was that there's just so much dribble and so much nonsense and so many spruikers that are just selling just fake products. And for me, it was kind of frustrating because I had the eagerness, I had the time, but I was struggling to find something to put it all into like a process, a plan for myself, which I admit, I think I wasted a lot of time listening to different spruikers, reading different books of ways people created wealth, not incorrectly, but just not in the right manner. And it was quite frustrating for me. And that brings me to think it was 2016 when I found your guys' podcast. It's something clicked in my brain, like, okay, these guys know what they're talking about. They're talking sense, and they're giving away all this knowledge that they've spent years building up. This is gold. And that's when I kind of latched on to the property podcast and just a property couch, sorry, and just went for it and used that as a kind of base, a guideline, and within that did my own research, did all my own kind of stuff. So you guys would be one of the biggest influences in my kind of where to look, where to study, what to do, and all my intel. So you guys kind of put it in a platform for me that was accessible in a way.
Oh, well, that's very humbling. That's our mission, and it's really exciting to see that's bearing some fruit. Were there any particular frameworks that helped you at the beginning? Because I'd love to dive into your plan, and I'd certainly love to have an opportunity to critique it. But was there any frameworks that you were able to use that maybe someone who's new to our podcast community might be able to say, well, that's the anchor that sort of helped you move forward?
Definitely the money smarts, just controlling that cash flow was big, because you could kind of plan what you're going to buy when and how quickly you can save up to buy your first thing or second thing, whatever it may be. That helped a lot. And also just with the A, B, C, D, looking back, I don't think I executed I didn't focus enough on the B, C, and D. So I was all about the kind of asset selection, which is, well, it was with my first property. I was so eager to go. I was keen and had the funds available. So I did my research and kind of went for it. But yeah, I've implemented all the stuff you guys teach, and all the strategies, the 18 different kind of property strategies that there are, and all that kind of stuff. So, and I've kind of tried to look at what you guys offer and all that kind of information and my own situation, and kind of make them walk side by side together peacefully.
You look at property in a different way now, don't you, Chris? when you start to, we're talking about the 18 strategies and all that type of stuff, when you go for an ISO walk or something like that, and you're discovering a new area and you're walking around, you're trying to put that context in your head, aren't you? Into the ugly duckling, reliable and durable, or, those types of things, the rare earth, all of that type of stuff becomes a bit of that interesting thing. You'll never have a normal walk around the suburbs again. I know that's how I feel.
Boys, I've got a problem. I think my girlfriend's got a big bone to pick with you guys. All I listen to is you guys in the car on long trips, and all I talk about when we go for a walk along the beach or along the streets is the different properties and what you can do with this, how you can add value to that. And my family and friends are going mental. They're hating it, but I kind of like. If you guys listen to me, you'd think, oh, he's just repeating word for word some of the stuff that we ramble on about, and it's I love it. I love any kind of chat with property. That's why I'm so eager to come on the show as well.
All right, I reckon that's an awesome segue into let's talk shop, right? What do you want to do? What are you looking at? What have you put into your plan? We'll do it 30,000 feet. We're not going to, give away all of the bells and whistles here, but certainly from your point of view, tell us your journey, and then, where can we add some value?
Yeah. So, I think I signed my first team professional contract when I was 20 years old. So before that, for the 4 years before that I was kind of getting paid, I was making, I think, around, I'm not shy to say, $20,000 net a year, right? But that kind of built up over 4 years. I wasn't spending anything. I was very conscious of that. So I had that savings ready to go. And after I'd signed my bigger first team contract, where it was a 5-year contract, I had the security, I had the strong income. All of a sudden, I'm in this kind of more powerful position to leverage money with the banks and all of that. So I was ready to go. My plan basically is, and has been since I was 18, I haven't really strayed much from that. I've tweaked little things as I've learnt and got smarter, obviously, along the way. But my plan is, over the 15, 20 year, hopefully, career span, is to acquire a mix of properties, investments, where some will be cash flow, cash cow kind of dominated, with obviously focusing on the strong capital, because that does do all the heavy lifting. And with the other kind of collection of properties I want to create are properties that are in their base level of value potential. So what I'm talking about is properties where I know that are rare and that I can further add value to later down the track. So that's what I've done so far. And I don't want to say, because it gets blown out of proportion, I want to develop the properties, because then people start thinking, oh, he wants to put 30 townhouses, or I want to buy a mixture of properties that are cash flow positive from very early on, and that will be paid off in 10 to 12 years on their own, and a mixture of properties that I will do interest only with an offset for that bigger block of land in a kind of already developed area, which is kind of like a piece that I will plan to and look to add value to in 15 to 20 years time. And my reasoning behind that is, if I acquire a property 20 years, say, before I put 2 extra properties on that, then I've really minimized the risk, I've minimized the cost, and I can also use the equity that I've built up in my cash cow properties to do that, to execute that plan. So that's kind of a rough plan summed up in 30 seconds of me going forward.
Good summary. What's the goal? What's the end goal? We talked about this on the phone when we chatted, but for the benefit of the audience, what's the summit for you?
The summit for me is to live off my passive income. So the summit for me is to not sell any properties that I buy, is to keep everything and to live off the rent. And the figure 100 to 150,000 is the sweet spot for me in passive income a year. Depending if my girlfriend of the time wants our kids to go to the most expensive schools, which she's already suggested she wants to, so it might have to be that extra 30,000 or whatever. But yeah, that sweet spot. The important thing for me is that I've got a limit, and I'm very conscious to the fact that I want to reach that limit. And it's not that I want to stop, but I want to start doing things that I'm more passionate about. it might be still property, but I want to put a limit so that I don't kind of get diverted from the fact that I want to create that passive income. That's enough for me, and I'm happy with this lifestyle. So I think setting that limit for me is important, and then after that is to enjoy my time.
So Chris, thank you for that backstory. There's a few questions that I've got there. In terms of those properties with the, as you say, the decent sized block of land, you're looking at sort of scarcity associated with that. So in terms of the character and charm of the property, or are you looking at sort of more an ugly duckling, but the ability to subdivide the land and improve that ugly duckling? Because I asked that question in relation to if you've got a beautiful character home in a really nice area, the worst thing you can potentially do for that is
cut it up,
subdivision and cut it up and put something on the back, because the scarcity of that is its combination of land, space, as well as character and charm of the property.
Yeah, no, of course it's not a character home. It's got no charm about it. It's ugly duckling. I made sure that it's going to last me the length of time that it needs to last me before completely falling apart. But it's definitely the ugly duckling entry level. So it won't lose much value by cutting it up, and also by choosing that ugly duckling. I like the fact that to think that I'm buying an asset which is land dominant, which the value is land dominant rather than dwelling dominant. That kind of over the long term, and I'm investing for a long term as I'm in my 20s, I think will pay dividends within itself.
Yeah, that's that land to asset ratio terminology that we use in terms of trying to get the land to be at least 60% of the overall value of the asset. And with that particular one that you've earmarked, you're going to do a little tidy up on a reno inside just to sort of make it presentable and reliable and durable, or what are you thinking about there in regards to? You're just going to let it deteriorate, but obviously safely, for any tenant that's going to stay in that property?
Yeah, I think I'll do maintenance work as it comes. At the moment, it's actually in quite good nick. I think it's been recently done in the last 10 years inside. So at the moment, it's sitting well, and it's not costing me any money. So that's fine to sit. And as stuff does arise, I'd be happy to fix it up in order to rent it out to a happy tenant.
And in terms of your the cash flow properties, what sort of research are you using to come to the conclusion that these are neutral or potentially going to be positively geared over, as you say, that next 10 to 12 years, it'll pay itself off? What variables are you considering in your location selection that are getting you to that sort of conclusion?
So it's obviously I want to rely heavily on the capital growth as well as a strong cash flow, but choosing a property that had that strong cash flow as my first property, I felt like it kind of gave me the security and confidence to be able to buy something that's a little bit more capital growth dominated for my second property is what I did. So to choose that kind of area and property type, I spent about 3 to 6 months when I was 20 years old, researching everything I could at the time, which was what the government's spending in that area, what the councils are spending, who's looking to get into that area, what the demographics are, what the population is, what their potential to grow is, and all that kind of stuff. So that to me, and also speaking to a few people that I know are very smart with property at the time. This is family, friends still we're talking about. These aren't experts. I never saw an expert. And we executed, and I'd like to say I bought it at a decent price. There was definitely competition to buy it as there was in the Sydney market in 2016. So that was the reasoning behind that decision.
Yeah, clearly there's I guess the cash flow property is interesting that you talked about. That feels safe, so that's interesting in itself. But one of the things for you to consider, Chris, is given your age and the time frame and the earning potential that you have, it's around as a general rule, what we normally say to a client is to go for capital growth early on when you've got the income to support it, and then then supplement that with cash cows towards the end so that we can retire out the debt. So without having in the weeds understanding of your circumstances, and we don't necessarily want to go into your confidentiality. The idea is if you're in this peak period of earning that can come and go. So clearly you want to do it to your own risk profile, but being able to have properties that definitely have that cash flow bias for the next little part of your pathway will serve you well, because you can actually use your income to still bring it back to a conservative level. You may want to have money in offset that brings these properties to, which are the capital growth funds are typically drain on cash flow. So you can have money in offset accounts that allows those to get closer to neutral, and therefore you can acquire more and then still give you that peace of mind around the security of having these properties fund themselves whilst having a superior cash flow base, because then towards the end we can look to retire out the debt. But your goal of $2,000 to $3,000 a week it's not like you're asking for $10,000 a week. So I guess that would be something that we would do with any client is, okay, the summit's realistic, the time frame, because if you remember, if listening through us, we've got time, target, income, and expense. Well, the time lever, you've got plenty of opportunity under the time lever. The target lever is that you're not going for massive blue sky. We don't know your income, but we have a generalization around professional athletes have this high income in a short window. And you've clearly made it obvious to us that you're frugal with your money. You showed that your first contract was 20,000. You went over to Europe at €1,500 a month and made it work. So the combination that you have in terms of time, target, income, and expense sounds like you're ticking the boxes in all of those categories, which is really great. So I would say to you that you're wanting to turn apples into apple pie in terms of adding value, not a bad strategy. You've got land as a goal for you, where you want the higher proportion of the purchase price to be towards the land and the dwelling in terms of the land asset ratio. So I'd say you're on track, but I'd just encourage you to have the confidence around at this stage of your life to really be getting those capital growth properties so that you can increase the wealth base at an exponential rate, because the income will get dragged along, or the rental return will get dragged along as a result.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. And it makes a lot of sense. And that's why and I've heard you talk about that a lot before. And that's why I've kind of gone, okay, I'm in my younger years now, I'm earning high. Let's leverage as much money as I can and let's keep putting money in the market. So I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like my next property that I'm looking to get isn't a property that I'm going to look to add much value for. It's going to be a pure capital growth property that I'm focused on, and it's going to be buy it, lock it away, and let it pay itself off over the long term.
And Chris, I think that's an important message for yourself. I mean, coming back to what Bryce was just saying around the levers, your 100 to 150,000, you're going to try and get that by late 30s, early 40s, right? Given your age now and what you're executing on. Because if we lift our eyes, that's going to be in excess of 200 to probably 220, 230,000 by the age of 60. If the compounding nature of the return and the yields continue to grow, as naturally inflation will play a role in that as well. So that's probably different to obviously most other households where now that you are a contractor professional athlete, in the world game, that those other peoples don't have that opportunity. The interesting thing about you taking a cash flow property first is also common for people in their very early 20s to play that role, because they only have the single income, or they only have they don't have a lot behind them, right? And their earning potential is not as great. So for those of you who are listening and you're in your early 20s, yield is going to play, or cash flow is going to play a big part in terms of that shortfall, especially if you haven't partnered up and you've got a single income. And then you can go after, which is our perfect model. Our dream model is as Bryce clearly highlighted, is capital growth asset, what we call a balanced asset, which is a blender of growth and yield, and then 1 or 2 little cash cows to tidy up the program and help pay off the debt. So we're sort of semi to all debt free by 65. And so that's that sort of 3 to 5 good properties. So I really love the fact that you've said, look, I'm a professional footballer. Who knows? I might have injury. I might have a terrible luck. You haven't. You've got good contracts, but you've put your toe in the water based on the income that you're earning at that time. That income's now improved, and now you're putting into action what we've talked about, which is if you've got strong surpluses, that means you can cover that shortfall, but you can buy a scarcer asset that over time is going to have strong land appeal, strong scarcity value attached to that, and that's going to bode well as a buy hold strategy for the next 50 years. So kudos to you.
Thanks, boys. That makes a lot of sense, and really appreciate all the massive insight you guys are giving me.
Hey Chris, what do you think as you reflect? Or just before I actually change gears, your portfolio. I don't think you'll mind me saying this, that it's in New South Wales. That's correct?
Yes.
You've heard us talk about borderless. Is that on your radar at all to be borderless and go outside of New South Wales?
100%, and that's something that I look back on now, 5 years ago, and I regret not even considering, because just out of the common misconception that you can only invest in your own backyard, and I fell trapped to that. And for me, honestly, traveling so much with football and everything like that, it was kind of hard to even think about a different city other than Sydney, because for my first home, for example, I didn't even get to see it until a year after I purchased it. I was in Italy at the time, calling my parents and telling them to go to open homes, and essentially I had to get the tick of approval from them. So I had to put my all my trust into their opinion of stuff as well. So investing internationally and borderless is definitely something I'm considering now, and will do for the future.
Nice.
What about commercial property, Chris? Is that on your radar, or are you going to stay safe in resi?
I did a lot of research last year in commercial property and talked to a few people, and it definitely looked interesting, and it looked like something I was encouraged by a few people to get into, but it didn't feel right. And I kind of did a little bit of research into the psychology of the next generation coming through, and how they're more kind of sentimentally orientated. And I think that kind of fear around shop fronts and shopping centers kind of lacking that interest in the future in the next 20-30 years, and that combined with obviously what we've seen with the commercial space for offices due to coronavirus is kind of put a big halt on any research for commercial property, and I've kind of stuck to residential.
Hey Chris, what's your message? We do get professional sportsmen listening to our podcast. We've had Andrew Bogut on the podcast, who's listening to us over in the US. So we do know that, and we don't know who they all are. But what would be what insights could you possibly give to other professional sportsmen who are listening to this, who may be thinking, "Oh, I need to set myself up a little bit better than I have"?
Yeah, I'd just say that that kind of ego attached with whatever kind of money or unnecessary lifestyle you're spending on is going to cost you a lot more money in the future. And the sooner you can kind of rid with that kind of stigma and ego of needing to look and feel a certain way, the better you're going to be off in the long term. And it could be life-changing for you to rid that sooner, because every kind of fancy new Rolex you buy, or whatever Rolls Royce you want to get into, that's costing you potentially years of added work in the future and lost time.
What about insights into someone who has to break the addiction, right? Because it's all pretty easy for us to say, you've come from great stock. Your parents have set you up well, and it sounds like the experience you had as a 16-year-old's really set you on the path well as well. But there are people who are addicted to the significance that comes from having a flashy watch and a flashy car. Do you have any insights or any observations that you've seen on how to on actually practically trying to break that?
For myself, I use a little reminder for myself. I say now, whenever I'm going to make a decent sized purchase, I always think and say, oh man, if I don't purchase that and I don't purchase 10 more things like that, I'm halfway to my next house deposit, which is going to exponentially make me X amount more in the future. So I've already got that mindset stuck in my head, and I'm not sure how someone who would be addicted to, say, shopping or nicer things and unnecessary discretionary spending would feel and how they would change. I honestly, I think I've been like this since I was a little boy. So
yeah.
Well, look, part of it has also got to do with the fact that you're in tune with who you are as a person, and you've got a lot of love and support around you. Most of those people who are looking for that material value need to do more work on the inside than the outside, unfortunately for them, and that's a message for them as well. And I know Bryce was referring to sportsmen as opposed to professional sports women as well, and there's two reasons for that. One is usually the men are a lot more flashier and sensible, and the girls are a lot more sensible. They don't necessarily need to, they might have the Tiffany jewelry, but they're not as overt as the professional men. And, we also know that some professional men get paid more than professional women in the sports field too. But to all of those professional sports women out there, we know we have to do more work to the men than the women because they don't seem to have that issue that the male does, where, it comes with the ego. And in some cases, that's their mindset. That's how they believe they're the best. And it's part of, supposedly that mindset of why they're great athletes as well, because they want to take that last shot in the game. They want to kick that goal. They actually believe that they are great at what they do.
Because Ben raises a good point there too, Chris. Do you get an opportunity to have those conversations with your the female professionals as well? Because unfortunately, they do not have parity of income. So clearly, they would need to be as frugal as ever to make sure that it lasts for them. Do you get an opportunity to have a conversation like that with your female counterparts in similar professional sports or similar situations? Yeah,
I do, and it's a sad situation to see that they're not earning equal to men in sport, and it is getting better. It's gotten better in the last few years, and us, the Socceroos, the men's national team, we all voted, and I think everyone, 100% of the men were on board to delegate more funds towards the women's game and to help them out. And they've got a bid launched today actually for the Women's World Cup to be held in Australia, which I was a part of, and women are a lot less egoistic than men in professional sport, and they seem to do a lot better with what money they can make in sport for the long term than men. And I speak to Sam Kerr, who's I think the best Australian female player in the world, and she's quite switched on. She's quite switched on with everything she does as well. So she's a great kind of idol to all the younger female athletes in Australia and the world. And Australia's lucky to have her spearing our head of female football.
Yeah, no, it's a brilliant story there, and as you say, it's a world game, and she's elite, and our obviously female team is also sort of mixes it with the world's best as the boys do. So it's great stuff. I'm conscious of time. We've done a lot of critiquing of the your portfolio, but did you have any questions for us? Is there any sticking points that you wanted us to return serve on in terms of your thinking and some clarity around that?
Yeah, so I can get your guys' opinion on the second purchase I made. So I didn't outline that both properties that I bought have currently 2 dwellings on them, older dwellings. So that's how I'm getting the strong cash flow. Do you think for my second property, the first one, the cash cow that starts at Granny Flat, and the second property is two houses but one title. Mm-hmm. 2 separate dwellings, 2 houses and 1 title. And I wanted to ask, do you guys think that my plan to buy a property to later add value to in, say, 15 to 20 years will minimize the risk? Because it is a riskier kind of venture, and it's obviously a higher reward. Do you think that'll have an impact on me kind of minimizing the risk, having more time to plan it and more time to kind of grow the value of the property so that my margins are better?
Yeah, well, that last bit is an important part, right? Because time will be your friend. Look, I think the thing is, the way I approach property development is that the risk comes from the volume, right? So if you're buying a house that maybe has 2 or 3 townhouses on it that you plan to hold, well, clearly you're not looking to realise the value through sale. You're looking to realise the value through the equity, right? So it really comes down to your appetite for the funding and keeping it in a way that allows you to stay under. You know, I'm not totally up to date, but I think it's under 5. Ben will confirm or deny, but under 5 keeps you in residential lending territory. Over 5 puts you into commercial lending territory. So it's the combination of time, so the equity that builds up in the property, a combination of the fact that if it's smaller in nature, and the fact that you want to hold them for the long term for yourself, it really, what you do through that strategy is once you develop them, you increase the yield because you're obviously turning 1 into 2 or 3, or I'm not sure how many. You're creating yield because you'll improve the amount of income that you can actually pull from the site. You'll actually create depreciation, so therefore there'll be a non-cash benefit from that. And there's also stamp duty savings because essentially if it's 2 or 3 townhouses and you bought it, you'd be paying stamp duty at a higher level. But you've created stamp duty at this very low on the transaction of the land 15, 20 years ago, and then all of a sudden you've turned them into 3, which typically doesn't have stamp duty attached to it. So it's a wonderful strategy for you. Where people get into trouble is if they buy it, which they've got the lending, and if they go aggressive just to buy the house, and then they've got to do the development, which has inherent risks in the development anyway, and then the holding costs that are associated with that, and then what contingency do you factor in, and what unforeseen X factors, i.e. coronavirus or whatever the next X factor is. Those sorts of things come with the short of the time frame. So to me, the strategy, without knowing the detail, is sound, and the length of time will serve you. So it really just comes down to, I wouldn't necessarily suggest, without us knowing fully the intricacies of what the next step is for you. You don't have to hold it for the long term and wait 30 years. You might find there's a sweet spot a little bit earlier on, which means that you can increase the cash flow and then obviously get the additional benefits from it. But no, I'm seeing it as sound. Ben?
Yeah, look, so can we ask you a couple of questions, Chris? And because ultimately this is about the property, not necessarily about your finances. So the asset that you've got in your mind that what you want to do is to buy that asset, retain that asset on the site, subdivide off the back, or is it to knock that one over and develop the site where you're going to put 2 or 3 on the site? What's the thinking? So
the thinking is the reason I bought older, ugly duckling style properties, but 2, is because I didn't want to buy something that's flashy and it's going to demand big yield now. I want to get the yield when I'm into my retirement so I can have that passive income. So my thinking was, I spoke to an architect and the council before I bought it, and I did that whole feasibility thing, and they've both said that you can build 3 townhouses and 1 villa home at the back. Or another option for me would be just to plonk another house in the middle, because it's on that 1,200 square meter kind of
lot,
perfectly shaped block. It's going to give me more options moving forward, and depending on how aggressive I want to be when I'm 40 or how non-aggressive I want to be is going to ultimately define what I do at that time. But I think it's just given me a few more options. And another thing it plays into my personal situation is I kind of want to create a bit of work for myself. When I finish football, I don't want to be sitting there fishing or twiddling my thumbs all day. So I kind of like that adrenaline. I like, I'm a confident person and I want to get into something. So to me, it was kind of a good fit. And just to clarify, these aren't like, it's not going to be a mass development. These are kind of boutique things that I want to build, I want to keep, I want to pay down, and I want to live off. So Chris,
sorry, Ben.
I was going to say just a couple of extra questions on that, because I think we're leaning into it, and I think it's really good for educational purposes for everyone. Tell me about the condition on the 2 assets that are on the lots, because one of the big things, one of your biggest costs obviously is labour, right? So even though we land bank over time, minimum wages are going to increase and the cost of building new dwellings is going to be okay. So the consideration of putting the one in the middle, if the bones are good on the two other assets, then you're going to potentially have a saving there. I also want to look at what's in the local area. So by way of example, when we come across these quarter acre blocks, and in this case, a quarter acre block is 1,014, but 1,200 is obviously moving to almost a third of an acre, right? What we tend to happen is when there's streets of those, most of the developers want to go in there and on every one of those and just basically load it up with as many properties as possible on that. Now, what we learn from that, from a value point of view, is we get an oversupply risk of the same sort of homogenous stock, where it's absolutely been built from a profiteering point of view, as opposed to and potentially a yield point of view. Now, sometimes a clever developer who's got a buy hold strategy, or an independent investor who's got a buy, will just put 2 on it and just give themselves a point of difference that they'll attract the tenant because they've got a bigger area of house. So the internals on the house will be better. And ultimately over time, they may be worth a little bit more when they're sold compared to, squeezing 5 onto that site. So that's a trade-off. That's the judgment call that you get to make as an investor in terms of what is it that I want. Now, if it was all about, I want to still put 5 on there and I just want to run cash cows, that's fine, right? You'll still probably make more out of it, but just be mindful that your capital growth is going to be compromised for that cash flow, as opposed to going the other way, whereas you've got the scarcer asset because you're one of the two. Your valuation is going to be better, but your overall net income is going to be slightly off that number. So coming back to what you're talking about there, if the bones are really good on those other 2 assets, well, there's your project, there's your hands, there's you getting your hands dirty in terms of turning those ugly ducklings into black swans. And then parking that one in the middle, as opposed to maybe going for that 4 or 5 on the site by bowling everything over, and that's the risk reward component. You're in for higher debt, you're in for a bigger clip of the ticket, you've got a stronger depreciation program, but because if these things are back at their own at skeleton stage, you're going to have a fairly good depreciation program anyway on the 2 assets that you're going to play around with.
Because it becomes a timing thing too. Because if you take an extension to what Ben just said too, Chris, if you were to keep the houses early, Ben rightly, that improves the capital value. If that's important for you to be able to continue on the portfolio, well, that's what you do. But based on what you said, if you keep it towards the end, you hold it for 15 years. Well, the back end is more about the income. So 4 dwellings providing more income versus 2 dwellings providing more value for the same amount of land. So if it was happening sooner rather than later, you'd probably go the less to get that capital injection so you could leverage for the next one. If it's towards the back end and you've got an opportunity to retire out the debt, you might want to go for the 4, because the end game, if we remember what this is all about, it's not I've got a bigger portfolio than you, my properties are better looking than yours, I've got more. That's irrelevant. The question is, do you have to go to work anymore? Because I don't. Because I've got my goal, my passive income goal. That means I don't trade time for money anymore. I get to do what I want when I want, as you said. So if we always remember, it becomes the cash flow. It's the currency for us to create the lifestyle, design the lifestyle we want. Well, then that helps us make decisions. And it also highlights a very important point that there is no one size fits all. So someone's listening to this who can't relate to out of the 4 levers, time, target, income, and expense with you, it means that they got to have a different strategy. Or someone in the same circumstances of you that's 20 years older, but everything else is the same in terms of income and assets. So it just highlights there's no one way and there's no one size fits all. So I don't know if we've hindered or helped there, but I think the summary is that there's a lot of choice that you're having because you're making good decisions, prudent decisions based on good cash flow management and making decisions about looking over the horizon rather than looking a couple of meters in front of you.
Yeah, 100%. And thanks so much for the intel, boys. It makes a lot of sense what you say, and it's not stuff that I haven't heard before in all the podcasts and all the books and everything that I've signed up for with you guys. So yeah, thanks for that. That's priceless intel.
Can I add one more little thing? Because it just, as you were talking there, Bryce, it made good sense to throw this in as well. Usually, and speaking from spending too much on a renovation myself, right here, I'm sort of the plumber with a leaky tap here. If your wet areas, Chris, on those two other assets, in other words, if the floor plan is not conducive to the way in which your tenants and people want to live their life into the future, and you've got to do a lot of work in terms of replumbing and changing locations of wet areas and getting access to those wet areas, that's where those costs blow out. So if you don't have a good, if those ugly ducklings as they are now are not conducive to fairly easy rework in terms of the renovation components, and you can plan them out with keeping the wet areas where they are, then there's less cost in terms of doing that. So this is where Bryce, again, perfect example. Every case is unique, because if we were sort of relocating wet areas from one side to the other, and then we're structurally going to re-engineer certain areas of the house to accommodate, all of a sudden it's like, you know what, it would have been quicker to just bowl them over and put a new one on it.
Yeah.
So they are the other considerations that I think are also valuable for you, and obviously for the community to understand that when you're making those judgment calls, and you see that the moment people start telling me that I'm going to move the kitchen and the bathroom from one side of the house to the other, and they've got all this restructure, I'm saying, careful guys, really careful here. You're telling me all this renovation work is going to be 250,000. For 275, I can get you a 30 square metre home, or 35 square, brand new, on a slab, and basically, and that's going to freestand for the next 50 years. So that's the bit that, in terms of getting into we're really in the weeds now, but that's the sort of, one-to-one advice that we would normally present when we saw the full evidence of the proposition in front of us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously you have to be really cautious with that kind of heavier duty renovations and weekend renovating and developing to an extent. And which is why personally I've chosen to take the long method, where to buy and to do that later. And in the meantime, the next 10, 15 years, spend it researching and studying and kind of organize that all into one place, so I can execute the plan as smoothly as possible when comes the time. Beautiful.
Hey, Chris, I've got to say, Ben hinted at it at the front of our chat. I want to reinforce it now. We've certainly appreciated the opportunity to get the insight into a professional sports person, but more importantly, someone who's really in tune with their own self-awareness and their own self-discovery around finances. So, mate, it's been a real pleasure to have you on. I 100% concur with Ben. I'm sure everyone who's listening to this would be surprised sometimes. They'll have to remind themselves that we're listening to a 25-year-old, because you've got a lot of wisdom, and I think a lot of humility, and I think a lot of people will get some benefit from that. So, mate, we appreciate you coming onto the Property Couch. We appreciate the support that you've given us, listening to us since you were 19. And on behalf of Ben and I, we want to apologise to your girlfriend for having to endure us.
Thanks heaps, boys. Thanks for having me on. It's it was a bit daunting coming on. I'm used to speaking to interviews and podcasts with talking football and sport, but it's a bit intimidating coming on and talking to you guys and the experts. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for putting up with me.
Oh, look, don't be intimidated, Chris. You've got 4.5 stars out of 5, mate. You're absolutely nailing it. So the rest is just going to come with experience and time. To be a 5-star investor. So congratulations to you. Loving that you're using Money Smarts. Are you on the portal?
I'm not on the portal yet. I've kind of just doing on the Excel so far, but I'm definitely going to get in the portal as soon as I hang up from you guys.
Yeah. Very good. Well, it just makes it a lot easier to run Money Smarts. That's all. But no, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Well played. Hope the quarantine when you get back to Perth isn't too onerous, and mate, we look forward to seeing you on the field. And go Perth Glory, Ben.
Yes, Bryce. Go Perth Glory.
Thanks, boys. I appreciate it.
Cheers, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, well, there you go, Ben. That was just a terrific opportunity to speak to someone who knows where they're headed and has got their head screwed on.
An outstanding young man, as I said, Bryce, before. And yes, he was talking about the Women's World Cup, so it was pre-recorded from a week or so ago. So that's obviously why we wanted to, acknowledge that, the women have won the rights to host with New Zealand. So that's a wonderful thing. But coming back to Chris, just quality all the way through. Can see the woods between the trees. He's just on the right course to be the successful guy that he is. And, his curiosity, he doesn't leave it up to other people. He's building out his plan and he's executing on the plan. So all credit to you, Chris. It was a quality interview, and I hope our listeners enjoyed it.
Hey Ben, do you think the quality was in his DNA, or do you think it was something to do with the fact that he lives over in Perth and there's just something about Perth people that's special and it's just rubbed off on him?
He's been imported into Perth, Bryce, so I think that probably answers that question.
It's just the infiltration. It's the rubbing shoulders with those sand gropers.
No. He's been doing it far longer than he's been in Perth.
There he goes.
Hopefully he can
see my cheeky little attempt to take some credit for the just the extraordinary young man that he is. But good on you, Chris. We appreciated you. I appreciated you reaching out to me on socials. It was nice to have a chat in the lead up to our conversation. It was certainly really great to share your story with our audience.
And while we're speaking of the West, I know we didn't start with our footy banter, Bryce, but because I didn't have really much to say, but I do want to congratulate the Fremantle Football Club and Justin Longmuir for his very first win as a coach. It's good to see you boys get results.
Was that a charity throw out just because Justin has a bit of black and white in him from last year, or was that just a genuine?
He's got some Pies DNA in him, so we want him to be successful, just not that successful when he's not with the Pies.
Well, I thought he brought his successful traits over in the first few games when we were 0-3 and looking down the barrel of 0-4, and then obviously the Fremantle spirit kicked in to get us over the line.
Just remember the greatest winning team in AFL, VFL history is the Collingwood Football Club. Ross, I don't need to say anything more. They've won more games than any other club.
We will move on. Grand finals you've lost.
What is your life hack this week, mate?
Oh, nice little pivot there. I love it. Hey, my life hack today is around Money Smarts, Ben. And when you're operating a joint Money Smart system, the whole idea is to the pitch from you and me is very simple, Ben. We say that if you implement this rules-based system, it's 10 minutes a month in terms of money management. But it's just got a little life hack around the Money Smarts that my wife Andrew and I do, because we've obviously gone through, we set it up, we have the ability to create some provisions. Mm-hmm. But my wife, Andrea, is probably self-confessed. She doesn't like the detail around the reconciliation of the bank statement around, what was that for again?
No one
created it. No, and let's be honest.
No one finds money management sexy. Let's be honest, right? I mean, people don't go home on the weekend and say, honey, I got a great idea. Let's do our monthly checkup. I mean, it's just not sexy. No one wants to do it, but that's why we try and make it as simple as possible.
Well, the results are sexy, man. The results are very, very sexy. It's just the process.
Transformational.
When you have a provision jar like we do for gifts, at the end of the month when you say what was that for, and it's like, that was for someone. So in order to avoid the arguments that could ensue from that, Ben, what we've done is we've created a Dropbox with by year 2020, and then we put January, February, March all the way through to December. And then when there's a credit card purchase that's made, we scan the receipt, Ben, into that, and then the receipt goes wherever it needs to go. We don't have to worry about it. So it makes that 10 minutes a month very, very efficient for us, given that if there is that one or two little entry that sort of puts a question mark next to it, Ben, we've got a system that works for both of us, which is mobile, that is on the spot. It takes very, very little time to do. And so that is my life hack today for our devotees, Ben. And hopefully every single person, Ben, who's listening to this podcast is a money smart convert. We want everyone to be money smart. So if they're not, Ben, they can go to makemoneysimpleagain.com.au. They can download the procedure manual. Our
best-selling book, our instruction manual, Bryce, you're absolutely right. And just on your point, I've had a couple of other of our Money Smarts users do something similar to what you do, Bryce. They don't necessarily use the Dropbox piece, but they take a photo of the receipt and they just put it into a folder inside their photos. And so it's in a classic reconciliation program, you basically grab your receipt and you grab your statement and you tick each of them off. And so that's also another way in which people can potentially have that as a life hack. But I love the idea that you've got it in storage. It's really easy for you to then look up, and that's how you guys set up. It's those little 1%ers that people do that make the monthly checkup really quick, because effectively, as part of that checkup, you're looking at your primary account statement, and you're looking at your credit card statement, and you're working out basically that everything's correct, that there hasn't been any additional charges on there that you're not aware of, you haven't been a victim of fraud. Then you're looking at those statements and you're basically ticking them off and say, that's a provisional spend. Yep, there's the receipt I've got for it. You go in there, you just record that, and your job is done. And then you can look at all your reporting. And there's lots of reporting in there to show you exactly where your status is, and you can see the surplus that you're trapping. So yes, you're right, Bryce. We encourage everyone to use the free Money Smart system on our My Wealth Portal platform.
There you go, Ben. I'm going to do a rallying cry for our folks who are money smarts. If you're listening to this and you're a money smarter, can you please reach out to me, Ben? You can email me. You can go onto Facebook and talk to Stiggy or Emma. You can go onto my socials. Whichever way it is simplest for you. As you're listening to this, you're running, you're on the train, or probably not on the train at the moment, Ben, but wherever it is that you are listening to this, and you've got a little 1%er like what we just talked about for Money Smarts, I would love to showcase them.
Nice.
I want to say your name. You can go to our website. You can go and do a speak pipe. If you leave me a message and you give me permission, I'll get your voice onto our podcast, which is really exciting for a lot of folks to do that, Ben. So the easiest, simplest way, info@thepropertycouch.com.au, via my socials, via TPC socials, whichever way. If you want to send me a WhatsApp, I'm on WhatsApp, whatever it takes for you to ping me a little note to tell me what your little 1%er is, so that you stay within the 10 minutes a month, Ben, so that you colour in the lines, get on with life. I would love to know it. I would love to showcase it on our podcast and share it with everyone. So please, if you're one of those people who thinks, I reckon I'd get around to it one day, please do it. I'd love to hear from you. I'll interact with you via socials, whatever it takes. But let me know what that is. And just a little reminder, Ben, the credit card is never for week-to-week discretionary spending.
No.
That is what the living and lifestyle account is for, Ben.
Correct.
We don't want to use our payments card. So, Ben, what's making property news?
So, Bryce, what's making property news? I saw some interesting data coming out of Domain this week in terms of auction results. So what we've got is an analysis between April and June. And April, obviously, we were in a big lockdown, and obviously Victoria is experiencing a spike at the moment, and we know that, obviously lockdowns and sort of restricted events are occurring here in Victoria. We understand that. But I just wanted to share with you some of the interesting data between Melbourne and Sydney during auction clearance rates period, because we got a lot of, auction got a lot of negative press, falling off a cliff, and so house prices were going to fall off a cliff. Well, they didn't, obviously, we know that. But here's some indications, Bryce. In Sydney, auction clearance rates in April were 36%. Withdrawals were 51%. Sold prior was 28%, and postponed was 6% during the month of April. Now, if we go and have a look at the month of June, auction clearance rates in Sydney were 60%, Bryce, back to normal. The auction withdrawals fell down to only 12%. Sold prior was 27%, and postponed auctions in June was only 9%. Okay, so that gives you an idea. In Melbourne, same sort of thing. So auction clearance rates, I'll now do them side by side so we get another way of looking at it. So in April, auction clearance rates were 29% in April for Melbourne and 54% now in June. In terms of homes withdrawn in Melbourne during April was 63%. It's now down to 12. Okay, so people are definitely following through with their auctions. And in terms of sold prior, it was 25% in April. It's now down to 16%. Now, that's a good indicator, Bryce, because that's basically saying that the real estate agents are basically saying, take this to auction. I've got enough demand here, and I'm confident that we're going to get a result, because they're not they're not selling them prior, and the homes withdrawn have dropped significantly, and so has the postponements. We've only seen 5% of properties being postponed. So that is what is making property news, that we are seeing an improvement in terms of sales activity. We're definitely seeing an improvement in terms of listings, but we aren't seeing listings grow because property volumes are back to where they were pre-COVID and the same level as where they were this time last year. So that will be interesting now that we've got a little bit of a COVID spike here again in Melbourne, and in terms of whether, the marketplace will be interfered with. But we obviously see, we've got situations all different right around the country where, the markets are performing in different ways because of some of the restrictions we have on social distancing and people movement. There you go, Bryce.
Hey Ben, you missed the big news though.
What's that, mate?
Mate, the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd and his wife Therese Rain have purchased a house on the Sunshine Coast, Ben, Sunshine Beach. Now, Ben, I would have thought that being a Prime Minister, you'd just be on your customary super, but obviously tongue in cheek. But they spent just a cheeky 17 million, Ben, on what looks to be a fantastic home, which was the former residence of Pat Rafter. So, mate, I don't know if you know, but I was on.
Teresa sold her business. She had a recruitment business, Bryce, and she sold that for double digits in the millions or something like that. So yes, I think for them, they can afford it.
I don't think they're scraping pennies together. I think he's a high flyer in a New York establishment now. He's the CEO of something, I can't remember what it is, but I don't know if you know, I was actually on the project with Kevin Rudd, and so that's as close as that's as close as my story got. He asked me a question, I responded to it. He asked me about his electorate. I said I lived in his electorate, and he goes, the question was, well, so what did you think of my electorate? And I said, well, the response was along the lines of, well, you were never there because you were Prime Minister at the time, and you were clearly spending most of your time in Canberra. So there you go. Thanks for sharing what's making property news there, Ben. But there you go, folks. Hopefully that's been an interesting episode for you. We loved, as we've said a couple of times now, we love the opportunity to have this conversation with Chris and obviously share some insights there. But until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Very well said. See you next week, folks.
Hey there folks, Bryce Holdaway here. Before you go, if you're new to our community and only listen to maybe a handful of episodes, I thoroughly recommend that you go all the way back to episode number 1, where we unpack all of the foundations when it comes to property investing. Now, for those of you that might be a little bit time poor, I've got good news for you. We have a binge guide that you can download straight away, which summarizes the first 20 episodes where Ben and I unpack the foundational pillars of the A, B, C, D, and so much more. And you can get that straight away. If you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20, you can download it and consume it whenever you want. It's completely free and available now. And for those of you, just a quick reminder that nothing we've spoken about today constitutes financial advice. We recommend that you reach out to your licensed professional advisor so that you can look at your unique circumstances before acting on any information. Now don't forget, go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and get your binge guide today.